Hello, friends. Welcome to Season 2 of the Club podcast. Each week, we bring you long-form conversations with the people building at the edges of crypto and community. At Seed Club, we believe in a world where people, not platforms, capture the value created online, and where community-owned networks are some of the most valuable organizations in the world. Join us for a front row seat to the latest insights and tactical learnings at the intersection of crypto and community. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to highlight that in under a month, applications for SCO5, Seed Club's 5th cohort, will be open. So if you are building a DAO, a tokenized community, a guild, something that's exploring the intersection of tokens and communities, we want to hear from you. We would love for you to apply. Make sure you hit us up at Seed Club HQ on Twitter, and we can help you be prepared for that application, which opens on August the 1st. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Matt Medved, co-founder of NFT NOW. Matt and I sort of joked about some of the interesting interactions we've had just prior to him starting NFT NOW, and of course, well into building what is rather impactful media company focused on the space. We started talking a bunch about his experience in building media brands in the legacy world, having worked at Billboard and Spin. We talk about how that has informed what they're trying to do with NFT NOW and stepping into the Web3 space. We got him to share some of his favorite experiments that he's seen out in the world. We talk about how DAOs and communities can be effective media organizations. The secret is empathy. And finished off the conversation talking about how to sort of build great founding teams in culture. Really enjoyed this conversation with Matt, so let's get into it. Matt, welcome to Club.
It's so good to be here. Jess, how you doing?
I'm good. So I have these sort of like two visions in my head of our last interactions. The first, I think I met you in this crazy like waterfront party in Miami the first time when Tiesto was playing in the background. Yes. And I think that's the very first touch point I had with you back in, I guess, Art Basel 2020. I don't know. It was a long time ago. I felt like it was a couple decades ago. So that's one image I have, which is fun, Party Matt, and great conversation there. And then the last searing image I have in my head was you in a tuxedo in Austin recently, just looking incredible.
The Meta Gala, right? A consensus?
Exactly, yeah. I was like, was not what I was expecting when I walked into that room to see all you ladies and gents just done right up in the full tuxedo.
We clean up nice.
I can 100% attest to that. So, okay, as I said, I think I have like a million different things we can get into here. I think what's super interesting is that you've had this full career before you even fell into Web3, doing some really impressive things that obviously have a lot of threads into what you're doing right now. So maybe let's just kick off with a little bit of like who you are and where you came from.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Medved, co-founder and CEO of NFT NOW. But long before that, I grew up in upstate New York, Rochester specifically, and come from music and journalism originally. That's what I studied in undergrad and started DJing when I was in college. And it's interesting because I had the opportunity to do some international journalism as well. And I worked for a newspaper in Cape Town, South Africa, my junior year, which kind of sent me down this international path. And I actually spent the next 2 years abroad, taught English in South Korea for a year, traveled all over Asia, and then lived in Australia for a year. And went into the nonprofit space, actually. Like a lot of people don't know, I actually started my career in nonprofits. And I was actually doing graduate programs, law and masters related to that in conflict resolution specifically. I had the opportunity to work for an amazing NGO called Search for Common Ground, doing research into security sector human rights abuse in Nigeria, actually. I was in Jos, right in the Middle Belt. Throughout this whole time, I was also like DJing, producing music, and writing about dance music for blogs. And I actually was even like DJing on the radio in Nigeria when I was there. Shout out to Rhythm 93.7. What was amazing was like I was always doing music, right? And so when I was finishing up these graduate programs, I did that with back-to-back exchange programs. So I lived in Milan for about 4 or 5 months, and then in Berlin for the better part of a year. And it was there that I got the opportunity to write for Billboard. Billboard actually reached out to me and were like, we love your writing. Are you exclusive to these blogs? And I was like, hell no, like love to write for Billboard, you know. My dad is a huge Beatles fan, like the biggest Beatles fan I've ever met. And so I grew up with like the Billboard like top 100 book like on the coffee table. And so it was really interesting because I started freelancing for Billboard, covered all like, you know, the European dance music festivals, was doing a ton in like the dance music space. It was super early, like covering guys like Kygo, Black Coffee, Alice in Wonderland, etc. Did the whole rise with Kygo. It was crazy. And then like saw this lane and I was like, oh, like I can't believe like Billboard doesn't have a dedicated dance music vertical. So I founded Billboard Dance in 2015 and got my law and master's degrees in the mail. Never took the bar, but like was like, yo, like I see this lane, like this lane is open and dance music is taking over America. Like I had to be at the forefront of this wave. And so what's amazing is during that period was coincided with the bull run of 2016 to 2018. And what's funny is I had started dabbling in crypto back in 2013 when I was actually living in Milan. I bought at the exact top, but Bitcoin at like the exact top of that market. Then I watched it like promptly crash 2 weeks later. I had like convinced my dad to buy a Bitcoin too. And I was like, just trust me, Dad, like the technology. And it just held on to it. I hadn't paid that much attention to the space though, like during kind of that bear market and I was really focused on the music side. So when things started rising again, it was really interesting because I was so deep in the dance music space and I was friends with a lot of DJs who were getting really into it. Guys like Blau, guys like RAC. And I started doing some coverage on that because I realized I was the only person at Billboard at the time who owned crypto or understood it at all. I actually remember doing this print piece on like DJs trading crypto, and it was like a lighthearted, fun piece. Blau was in it. I think RAC was in it too. It kind of went nuts on like Bitcoin Maxi Twitter because it was the first time that Billboard, the like venerated industry Bible that has been around since the 1800s, had ever actually like printed an article about Bitcoin like in print, and all that. So that was cool. And that actually turned me on to the fact that there was a real community around it because just around crypto in general, because when I got into crypto, it was in the Reddit era, which is a different beast than like Twitter and such. And so I did a bunch of panels at RAC, at South by. I started really like doing a lot of coverage in music and blockchain and like how does this empower artists? And I advised for Blau's Music and Blockchain Festival, OMF back then. And it was like, we were just a little early, and like what was interesting was like, I really do think like NFTs were like that missing puzzle piece. After I left Billboard, I ran Spin Magazine as editor-in-chief, which was amazing because that was always my favorite magazine growing up. I exited with the sale of that in 2020 and was actually running content at Modern Luxury, the lifestyle publisher, when Blau pulled me down the NFT rabbit hole in fall 2020. And I remember a phone call with him where multiple light bulbs were just going off in my head. And I realized that this was the technology that I believed in for a very long time, finally disrupting the fields I'm actually passionate about, music, art, and culture, in a way that empowers creators. And it captured my imagination and my conviction in a way that crypto on its own never did, because at the end of the day, I'm not a finance guy. I always believed in the technology. I do believe that it was the future, but I was never like motivated to make it my main thing until NFTs. And so, started the NFT NOW accounts in January 2021 after being like really active on NFT Clubhouse. And my co-founders, Alejandro and Sam and I really like hit the ground running with it and launched the podcast. And yeah, we all went full time on it in June 2021. And now it's a team of 15 plus, which is crazy.
I love this idea of where the market is today. And there's always folks who are sort of naysayers about the space generally, but it's usually through like people who have like a real intimate experience with the challenges of the existing system seem to capture or jump on board a lot earlier, right? So we're seeing a lot in music, we're seeing a lot in traditional art. I think you're seeing people who are early Bitcoin maxis are probably seeing like the challenges with the financial system coming out of 2008. Anybody who sends wire transfers, I don't understand if you send a wire transfer why you would ever be bearish on crypto, because give me a break, that is still the biggest pain in the ass in my month here right now, right? But I'm curious, like you sort of have this like music centric, but also journalism, media. Maybe if you launched today, you'd be called a creator. What are some of like those light bulbs that went off for you in that earlier conversation?
It's a great question. So look, like as I said, multiple light bulbs went off. Light bulbs went off to me as a musician myself, as someone who DJs, produces, has released music, has performed at festivals, and like thinking about how this creates a deeper level of ambassadorship and connection with your fans, and the opportunity to directly monetize free from the major labels and the middlemen and the ads and the algorithms of centralized systems. Kevin Kelly's whole 1,000 True Fans is something I've always believed in, and I felt like this really kind of like unlocked the true potential of the internet. I was absolutely inspired as well from the media side because, coming from legacy media, I saw firsthand just how broken like the Web2 business model is. Like I witnessed just like the misaligned incentives that model gives to publications, where publications are optimizing for advertisers and brands rather than actually serving their core readers, ending up in like clickbait, like races to the bottom because they're having to game algorithms and laying off really good journalists, even when they've met their traffic targets and things like that, because it's just like the money isn't there and like the model is just broken. It was very clear to me that the business model was broken. It was really frustrating because it was happening at a time where I think journalism and information has never been more important, and to see this industry contracting was really troubling. And so what really inspired me is like thinking about like how in Web 2, media companies build audience as a means to an end of monetizing it indirectly as a middleman for brands, right? And they're constantly at the mercy of these centralized social media platforms and their algorithms and, their ad models and everything. Whereas like seeing how in Web3, like creators and brands can actually build community as an end in itself and then directly monetize by sharing in the value that they're creating for their community, it just felt right. This is a way to well and truly like reward your most loyal consumers and your most loyal customers and your most loyal community members. Because I think it comes down to the difference between audience and community. Like audience is aware that you exist. They follow you on some platform. They might click here things now and then, but community actually want to see you win. And community, especially in Web3, has a stake in doing so. It's the difference between being a passive observer and a shareholder. As someone who's like always put passion into everything that I've ever done, I can't mail it in, you know what I mean? And like, I can't be a part of an industry where people are mailing it in. And so like, that was why it just clicked for me on so many levels, like as a creator, as a journalist, and as someone who has built, media brands before. And then just as a futurist and someone who loves technology, like I always say, like, there's a reason why so many of the musicians that were early to adopt this technology come from the dance music world. It's because we're all nerds at the end of the day. Like our style of music wouldn't even exist without technology, and so it's like we're all like situated on that cutting edge. And so like it felt really right. And that's why I had the conviction to do what a lot of people thought was crazy, which was leave a pretty cushy media job, like SVP of content at like Modern Luxury, where I'd been like revamping these legacy print brands, and like to jump into NFTs. And this was months before Beeple. So like people were like, didn't even know like what I was talking about when I like did some sort of crypto thing. But when you just know. And I also felt like, given my experience in crypto, I had seen this movie before with Bitcoin. The arguments that I was hearing, the reluctance for acceptance, the misinformation, the resistance, like all of it that was coming from the creative community reminded me exactly of what the reaction from the financial system in 2013 as Bitcoin was like capturing headlines and things like that. And I was like, I've already seen this movie. I know how this ends. And this time it's not magic internet money. It's music, art, and culture. And you don't bet against music, art, and culture.
It's not usually we have a mic drop so early in a conversation, Matt, but I appreciate you bringing that there. For me, that sort of, I've seen this movie before, was like I graduated university just as Facebook and YouTube were becoming a thing. And I got into that space super early. And I think that big takeaways I had were like very much underestimate the potential size and scale of these network technologies. And I was still early in my career at that point, but seeing just like, we can say about all the bad things that exist in Web 2, but you cannot ignore the fact that it completely changed all these industries. And so I think for me, that was the same thing, right? Yes, I've seen the same sort of arguments. And then also like the scale and potential of this stuff is just so much bigger than you're able to grok in the moment when you're just trying to grok it. It's pattern matching, right? It's like, where am I seeing these patterns before, and then applying them to this sort of the new space. There's like a whole host of threads I want to pull on with you, because I know you you laid out a very simple world that you live in, but I know there's a bunch of different permutations of that. But I think sort of a unique opportunity to talk to somebody who's operated and built major media organizations and is now saying, okay, I'm going to come over and build what I assume you have a big plan for, building a major media organization in Web3. You've learned some very hard lessons. You've sort of seen what is wrong. What are you doing different? Like, what is NFT Now doing different to solve those challenges that exist in the legacy media world?
I'm so glad you asked that. So look, NFT Now, our mission from the very beginning, empower the creators of culture and help drive mainstream adoption of NFTs. So we're not content to preach to the choir. We need to convert the masses. We want to bring the next million, 10 million, 100 million, billion people into Web3 through NFTs. And so, because we believe that NFTs are going to fundamentally redefine how creators and their communities create and share value across all disciplines, right? So it was very important for us, like having seen the issues with Web2 media, to do it differently. For example, like you take a look at what we are doing, you take a look also at like what we're not doing. If you go to nftnow.com, you're not going to see any banner ads. We're not doing programmatic ads. We're not touching them. We don't think that they align incentives. We don't think that we should be serving the interests of advertisers over our core community. We want to pioneer how a media company can create and capture value in Web3. And I think part of that is understanding a community-centric media model doesn't mean selling access to an audience or like optimizing for advertisers rather than creating true ownership and super serving a core community. I think that one thing that's really interesting is right now, people just aren't loyal to brands in the media space with few exceptions. There are a few exceptions, New York Times, some others, but like people are more loyal to the headline. The headline could be from anyone. But if it's the first one that comes across your feed, you're going to click it. So how do we figure out a way for people to feel invested? How do we create a way for people to feel ownership, for them to actually have an incentive to share NFT Now's content or to be a part of the NFT Now ecosystem? And so we have a lot of big plans in that regard, and it's super exciting. I could only kind of speak in broad brushstrokes right now. But I think that like in building a community-centric media model, you have to understand that like it's really turning it upside down, because so much of Web2 media was focused at weak ties at the top of the funnel about like just growing as much audience as possible, like by any means necessary, and then selling access to it. Whereas like in Web3, having a smaller audience, but that is actually has close ties and is engaged and actually cares about you and what you're doing is so much more valuable. It's so much more valuable. And that's what we want to cultivate. And that's what we're cultivating at NFT Now. So, I mean, look, like we will be dropping NFTs. They will involve membership. That's coming down the pipeline. But we have a lot of big plans also around, the future of Web3 media, even bigger than just NFT Now. And so it's really important that we kind of hold true to our principles and do things in a different way, because the last thing we ever wanted was for NFT Now to just be a traditional Web2 media company covering NFTs. That's a massive missed opportunity, right? But one thing that we are cognizant of is the fact that it is still extremely early in terms of market penetration. And so we need to meet the masses where they are. And that's why we have focused on building our audience on Web2 platforms like Instagram, like YouTube, and all that. That's very intentional. And it's because we recognize that in order to truly drive mainstream adoption of NFTs, we have to be continuing to meet people where they're comfortable being. And it's not going to be an immediate transition from Web 2 to Web 3. It's going to be a Web 2.2, a Web 2.3, a Web 2.5. And like we're very much like situating ourselves there comfortably as we continue to add more Web 3 features. And we really do want to be that onboard ramp for the mainstream market. We think about our audience in two buckets. And we got this framework actually from a conversation that we were fortunate enough to have with the late Virgil Abloh. We had a chat with him. It was in spring of 2021, before we all took the full-time leap, but while we were doing the pre-seed raise for NFT Now. And he was really curious about NFTs and Web3. And as we now know, he was working on a lot of concepts himself, which we didn't know at that point. But we had a conversation with him and, bouncing ideas and telling him what we were up to. And he talked about the purists and the tourists in the space, because that's how he thought about luxury and about streetwear. And that's how we think about NFTs and Web3. And we want to be that trusted resource for both the purists and the tourists in the space. Obviously, like the purists they're degenning in the projects, late night Twitter spaces. Like I look in the mirror, I know I'm in that purist, category these days, but I remember what it was like to take that journey of a tourist into the space. Like I did the crypto learning curve in 2013 when there were far fewer guide rails. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't trust anyone back then, or even the platforms you were using. Even with that under my belt, I still had to do the NFT learning curve in 2020. I still had to spend hours researching and wrapping my head around the artists, the platforms, the market dynamics and all that. And I'm still learning every day. And there are a lot of people who are doing both at once. And that could be really daunting. We really want to be there for those tourists as well, really to help bring them into the space, give them the resources that they need to succeed in this space. And I don't just mean succeed financially. I mean like thrive creatively. I mean like be able to build their communities and hopefully have alternatives to the Web 2 centralized systems that have created so many gatekeepers and inequities over the years.
I love that. Purists and tourists. Doing either of the extremes. Like purist is very limiting. Tourist is almost watering down the truth so much, or like the realities to where it isn't actually valuable. That's interesting. So I'm curious, you use this term sort of community-centric media model. And I think in the earliest days, as I was sort of conceptualizing C Club, I sort of said there was like these three main buckets that I think we need to go do really well. One is sort of create this sense of community and membership that, maybe when you start to see people putting C Club in their Twitter bios, that would be a good indication of sort of this type of connection that people would have there. Two, we needed to have capital, right? So that we could, if people were joining, we would be able to accelerate what they're doing. We could invest. There was resources to go do good things. And three, the third bucket was this idea of media or distribution. How do we go sort of create and be active in perpetuating the meme and the ideas, et cetera, beyond. And so from that sort of formation, I believe that most DAOs are going to be media companies in some level, or at least have media initiatives that are around there. And so, it's very obvious that you've thought so deeply about this space. If you were to sort of be, we have 54 wonderful projects that we've backed at C Club. I want to, embed media knowledge in their heads. They are probably engaged in media, whether they're purposely doing it or not, through Twitter, through Discord, etc. What advice or insight might you be able to share with communities who are, really trying to get their message out and I guess claim some space in the mind share of this sort of Web3 space?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many, but it's a really great question. At the end of the day, I've always felt that to be a successful media company, and I think all successful companies are going to be media companies to some degree going forward. They already are to some degree, but it's only going to continue because, storytelling is one of the most powerful forces on earth. That could be the make or break for any company, is the narrative and the actual story behind it. I think that all storytelling and well done media operations are exercises in empathy. You need to think first and foremost about who is your audience, who is your community. The same tweet, the same article, the same positioning is not going to resonate the same between different groups. And it was really interesting to learn this firsthand because this intuitively, but then when you see it, for example, when I went from Billboard Dance to Spin, I went from an 18 to 24 audience that was highly tech savvy and very plugged in on all things, social media to a 28 to 44, you know what I mean? Those 25 to 34, not as tech savvy, different kind of views, all of that, different platforms mattered to them. It was more Facebook than Instagram, et cetera. I had to see all that and I had to recalibrate content strategy. I had to rethink how we'd been doing things. Again, a balancing act because I didn't want Spin to remain in the past. I wanted it to also appeal to the new generation, but also you can't abandon the community and audience that you have. And so you have to really think empathetically and put yourself in the shoes of the people who are, in this case, reading your publication. In the case of some of the companies you work with, they actually, I think, have more tools at their disposal for understanding those communities because they're interfacing with them more directly at that bottom of funnel. I am personally not a big fan of using Discord, but I recognize that Discord serves an incredibly important function right now. I wish there was a better platform for it, but right now Discord is your bottom of funnel. And that's so important for creating those close ties, for building real community, for interfacing with people day to day, reaching them directly, not being at the mercy of an algorithm. So the fact that you're able to interface with them, you need to be thinking about what they want. You need to be thinking about what's going to interest them. You need to be thinking about what are they going through. The same things that may have worked during a bull market are not going to work during a bear. People have different concerns now. People have different forces at play. You have to be able to adapt to those. You need to think about those. It's interesting because I also often say that DJing is an exercise in empathy. And there's actually parallels in it to me. It's you walk into a room and your job is to create music that is going to bring people together, create a good time, in some cases warm it up before a headliner comes on or kind of wind it down. After, there's different, you have to read the room. You have to figure out, 8 p.m. is not the same as 2 a.m. and Friday at a festival is not the same as Sunday. So being able to understand what that audience wants while still making it true to you. That's the other thing too. Still making it true to you, the songs you want to play, is a really fun and incredibly rewarding intellectual challenge. As a music lover, and I actually think as a leader, there's direct parallels to me. There's analogs. It's the same thing. You need to create growth. You need to create a harmonious business environment where people thrive and take off and succeed. You need to create a healthy workplace culture. You need to meet your KPIs. You need to build your org and all that. You have to do it by being incredibly attentive to the people that are there. And that can be obviously your staff, but it's also the people who are your consumers, who are your community members, who are your readers, who are your watchers, your viewers. Like, you need to be putting yourself in their shoes and thinking about them first and foremost. I always say that like an NFT drop, it's a beginning, it's not an end. And if you're not thinking about the person on the other side of that sale, if your thought process has only gone up to the point of sale, you're not thinking about that person, why they'd be motivated to purchase your NFT and what they're going to expect going forward, how you're going to continue to reward them, how you're going to continue to bring value to them, how you're going to continue to cultivate what is an incredibly powerful and valuable direct connection you now have with them, you're going to fail. Right? You're going to fail if you're not thinking that way. And I think it all comes back down to empathy.
Yeah, I find that interesting. A thread I've been thinking about quite a bit recently is just, the importance of trust in this sort of trustless space that we have.
Oh, and I like that.
Yeah, like Seth Godin is just, you put trust on his website, and the guy's just thought so deeply about these topics, really. How are we building true value for our readers? How do we actually, because I think inherent in like the traditional model is a complete destruction of value or disbelief or not honoring the value of one's attention. In a world where we have scarce attention, there's just so many things we can go spend our time on. How do we actually go and build trust? And I think empathy is just such a core piece to that. I wonder if you have any other thoughts on how, because I mean, obviously you guys are trying to build both yourself up and also your brand as this authoritative space. And yet trust has so many different meanings in this world.
Yeah. Look, trust actually is an important part of the NFT Now origin story, because Sam and Ale and I, like, we founded NFT Now to solve a problem that we experienced ourselves, which was, as we were going down the NFT rabbit hole, we found it really difficult to find credible, trustworthy resources to learn about the space, to navigate the space. When we sort of were going down the rabbit hole in 2020, there were a lot of platforms with megaphones promoting their own drops and a lot of talking head influencers like shilling their own bags. And like, there was no independent, credible, trusted source that was dedicated to NFTs. The crypto publications were dipping a toe, but like, you know what I mean? Like, the legacy Web2 ones were like, oh, this is like, you'll get a beat reporter on it. But like, where was the Billboard of the NFT space? Like, where was the complex of the NFT space? It didn't exist. And that's why we built NFT Now, was because it was very important to us that it be trustworthy. Trust was the most important thing. And, Jess, like, we left high 7 figures in revenue on the table last year because it would have cost us our credibility. All of the bullshit that you saw on @NFT and like that Instagram account and like all the scam projects and like all of that cookie cutter bullshit, they tried to come to us too. And we said no. We said no, because we recognized that trust and our credibility, like trust is priceless. And once it's been broken, you can't get it back. And now, like, you look like they're no longer there. All of the others that prioritized short-term revenue over credibility and trust, they're not here anymore. Or if they are, their brand is so damaged that they're just irrelevant. And so that trust is something that's very important to us, and it's something we take extremely seriously as we cover and we navigate the space.
Earlier saying, like, I think we underestimate the scale and size the space is going to get to. If you don't have that in mind, I think it's very much easier to make these short-term decisions, right? This is all going to disappear next month, and so why would I not go cash out? And that's rampant in the space. In fact, most of the incentives are geared towards that. But I mean, what's that Buffett saying? The most powerful force in the universe is compound interest, right? So these compounding actions over time. I think about that often with C Club. Like, we are not a token factory. We could have launched so many more things that would have made so much more revenue value for us. But our belief is, by being curated and being that source of trust for the best community token projects, that's going to pay massive dividends for us in the future, and like, just no doubt about that in my mind whatsoever. So I mean, I think Definitely. We're probably both on the same page, and that's a very easy decision to make, right? There's no conflict there whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's like, I think that's super wise, Jess, because like, it's the shiny object syndrome too. Even aside from just like the course of credibility, like, there's a ton of like easy revenue streams that NFT Now could do right now, but some of them would just distract us from our core mission, you know what I mean? And like our core value proposition and what we're really trying to build. And I'm sure it's the same with you and Seed Club. Like, there's no shortage of shiny objects in Web3, right? And some people just lurch from one to the other and find success, but that's not how you build a brand. That's not how you build a vision. That's not how you make a vision come to life. That's not how you intentionally execute upon a game plan and make the change that you want to see. And so sometimes you have to recognize that something may be a good opportunity, but it's not the right time, or the opportunity cost associated with it is just not something that would serve your business interest or your organizational mission.
Maybe a thread that I sort of let go, but I think is super interesting, at least it's top of mind for me. And so I'm going to use this opportunity to steal your insights on this. We're talking about community-centered.
They're not stolen. They're happily offered. They're happily offered up.
Borrowed and hopefully added to and put out into the ether. I think like there's this, like the fundamental opportunity, and when you're talking about community-centric, I think, and even it sounds in some of your plans and being able to kind of bring in, change audience to members and recognize that membership through a digital asset, which is sort of like, the core of so many DAOs, I think so many tokenized communities, NFT projects. The idea there, at least at the core, is that, as value gets created in this community, people get to participate or at least have access to that value. And maybe that value is represented by an asset. The how of that, like the how to engage a community in the value creation, especially in media, I think is a huge opportunity. And I just don't see it being done super well right now. I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
What's interesting right now is that the NFT climate is still so nascent that we haven't really seen category-specific markets fully develop yet, right? So like what I mean by that is the use cases that first sort of developed and drove market volume were digital art, right? Obviously, digital collectibles, gaming, et cetera. But but there's so many other categories. And now we're starting to see music, photography rise to the front. We're starting to see TV film get in an interesting way. We're seeing NFTs for good. We're seeing all these different areas. But what's interesting is this community at large in this space, both internally and externally, tends to paint in broad brushstrokes and lump a lot of things together that we would never lump together prior to Web3 or NFTs, And presumably, I think once these markets mature enough, we won't lump them together and we'll realize how kind of silly it was that we did. So to me, I look at art and then I look at collectibles and I look at membership passes and all that. These have very different consumer and creative priorities at play. The people who are doing degen mints, at 4 a.m. and flipping and that resembles more of a casino than it does a major auction house, right? I don't think those people would be at Sotheby's or at Christie's bidding on fine art. And that's okay. It's ridiculous that we ever would expect them to. It's a different consumer mindset, right? And so then similarly, it's the idea, there was that whole debate in the space about art and utility. And it's prior to Web3, you didn't expect a painting that you bought to get you into a club. And you also didn't necessarily expect your membership to some club to be a piece of art itself. It's amazing that these things can be both things in Web3. The technology allows for some incredible things, but right now, because it's so nascent, a lot of what we're doing is lumping everything together, expecting the same things from very different projects, underserving the real potential of this technology, which is far bigger than simply number go up, you know what I mean? And speculative investment. And so what I'd like to see more of, especially in the media space, is an understanding of that. It's something we're trying to do very well, and a differentiation there. That these different categories are going to have, whether it's any of the ones I mentioned, or even going into some of the more mundane things like real estate and government documents and healthcare records and all these things that can live on the blockchain, looking at what the soul-bound tokens are going to be, all that. These things are going to have the same depth and breadth of creative and consumer priorities as they did prior to NFTs. And that's a healthy thing. So I think we need to recalibrate our understanding and not expect every artist to have utility or every NFT release to be so floor focused and the like. And, and so I think it's easy sometimes right now, a lot of the engagement from a media perspective, a lot of the people who are entering this space, a lot of the purists and the tourists are all look, it's the same thing that drove interest in crypto. It's the opportunity to make money right now is a big driver. It's not the only driver, but it is a big driver. And I think that as storytellers, as educators, as people who are helping new people enter the space, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we limit the scope of our narrative and the scope of our storytelling and the content and media offerings that we're offering and the programming that we're doing to that narrow mindset, which is the easy, the low-hanging fruit, we're underserving everyone. we're underserving the technology. We're going to prolong the time it takes for mainstream adoption because these hype-driven speculative cycles are not sustainable. There will always be a side of that, and that's fine. But that shouldn't be what everything is catering to. And I think that as the market matures, again, market penetration is still so tiny in NFTs when you think about it at scale, that like things will be able to, like there will be microeconomies, and like we won't even be able to like log into a Nance and be like, oh, NFTs are down. Like they'll be like, oh no, like, you know, music is doing this, or like this is doing that, or like this type of project is doing that. And you're already starting to see that a little bit. You're starting to see that a little bit, but it's like, you know, we have a long way to go. And so I think like that's one thing I'd like to see is like, I would like to see media in the space, but also like influencers in the space, people who have large platforms, people who are commentators of the space, all understanding that I think like we have a responsibility to push this space forward and not just like tread water where it's like easy and lucrative.
Love it. I'm curious. I mean, you are obviously a student of media, of Web3, of NFTs. You're sort of in a seat where you get to see lots of things. And, you know, a big part of at least my worldview around how we move things forward is that, you know, in the space generally is through experimentation and building. And it's people who are poking at new edges that all of a sudden unlock something new. And things like NOW are no stranger to folks listening to this podcast. And we had, you know, dove into that sort of stuff. But I think there's like, my guess is you've seen some things, if we sort of look at the media NFT world, that are really interesting experiments that most of our audience probably hasn't heard yet. So I'm curious, what are some of those interesting Web3 media experiments that you might put on our radar?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think a lot of them have been more creator focused. Like I think Mirror is a really interesting platform for those who aren't familiar, kind of like the Medium or Substack of like of Web3. And I think it's really cool what they're doing there. Like some OGs in the space, like Redline Gazette, that's like super down the purist like rabbit hole. But like, I think it's cool like that they're like doing this publication that would live on chain. It's been interesting to see, you know, what Keith Grossman has done with Time, bringing a legacy brand into the space and revitalizing it in collaboration with artists, you know, like with timepieces, and then also like having the magazine live there. And like there's some really interesting experiments. But yeah, we've got some interesting plans on that front that I don't think anyone has done yet. And I'm excited to show you when I can.
Yeah, this is me prospecting for alpha, Matt. I'm like, how can you resist sharing the exciting experiments? What is interesting, and I think you were alluding to why earlier, right? If you go to NFT Now right now, it looks like a Web2 publication. Now, fair, no big banner ads, no ads. And that is definitely, I mean, if you hop over to Business Insider, you're going to like close 42 different pop-ups before you can even read the content, and then probably have to pay money to watch it anyway. So that is definitely noticeable. But to me, it very much reads like a very thoughtful, pragmatic approach. And I see you being a very strategic human being and how you're going to build this out. And you've put focus on content and on trust and on building your audience. I know that you
I can hint. I'll give you a little hint. Hint. So like, obviously I mentioned the membership, but like one thing to really think about too is like the concept of like collectible content. One thing that really inspired me was how NFTs provided digital artists with a means to build a collector base for the first time. And all of a sudden, digital artists, some of the most talented artists in the world, who were being paid peanuts relative to their talent to do client work, they were in a services economy, that all of a sudden, the fuck renders and Victor Mosqueras of the world were able to make a living on their own creative vision. They were able to take something that previously could not be scarce. By its very nature in Web2, it could not be scarce. They were able to create this digital scarcity to it, and it totally transformed their lives, and it's totally transformed their livelihoods. And now we have digital artists being sold in major auction houses and represented by, you know, and having representation in the biggest, you know, the most prestigious galleries, and also doing all this without the need to play by their rules, right? That's a critical part. And so I think a lot about collectible content and that idea of being able to create this mechanism for scarcity and ownership around content that we've kind of previously taken for granted as not being something that there was scarce, or that we necessarily thought that there was a means of having that ownership in. I think the future of media in Web3 is tokenized.
Well, you're going to have no debate here, as big fan of tokens being superpowers for communities. And I think this entire conversation is sort of centered around the empowerment of that group being like the core opportunity here. So I know that one of the things that I'm very curious about sort of its inception and reception was the NFT 100
Yeah.
list that you posted. And I think lists are, so wonderful in many ways. They obviously drive a lot of traffic. They bring a bunch of focus. My guess is that there's a piece here around sort of building that trust and also sort of like highlighting folks that are perceived to be, at least in your opinion, good actors in this space. Also, like part of the reason why I think they're so good at driving traffic is like if you're not on that list and you think you should be on it, you're probably gonna be pissed and tweet about it a little bit. But I'm curious, what was like the intention behind that and how was that received?
Absolutely. So I'm no stranger to the list. Obviously at Billboard we had the Billboard Power 100, and while there we launched the Billboard Dance 100 and the Billboard Dance Power Players, which was selections of like the top dance and electronic artists globally, and also recognizing the industry side. But what's interesting is like at the end of the day, the NFT 100, it was very important that we do that differently, because it's a different community, it has different values, and we wanted it to truly be a celebration, and we want it to be in the spirit of the space. One of the most beautiful things about the NFT space, at its core with this community, there's the spirit of cooperation and not competition, right? One thing that I loved when I was first coming up in NFT Clubhouse was just how artists would promote each other's drops when they had no financial interest in it. It was just because like there was this collective friendship and the desire to see everyone succeed. And I think that was born from the fact that there's this very special community. Nobody goes into digital art, at least prior to NFTs, for the money. It's not an easy career field. You're doing a lot of client work. Maybe you're selling some prints, a few exceptions. So you had this community of true creatives who had done everything for the right reasons, or like gotten into it for the right reasons, all of a sudden making more money than they ever dreamed of, and being able to make a living off their creative vision in a way that wasn't possible. And what do they want to do? They want to help everyone, all of their friends, like be part of this as well, because it's so special and it's like this energy. And so we wanted to really capture that. And some people were like, why do a list? Why do a list at all? I think that there's an argument there, but the fact is people were making lists. There were already lists happening. There were a number of other publications did lists, and we didn't think that they captured the spirit of the space. And so if lists are being made, we want to make sure that we have a voice in that, and that the one that we're doing does it right. And so, for example, it was extremely important to us that the NFT 100 be unranked. It's 100 creators, it's 100 community leaders, and it's listed alphabetically. No one is higher than the other. That's not what this is about. It's not about trying to weigh people's artistry or impact against each other. It's done in the spirit of celebration, not competition, and it's recognition. It's about recognition. One thing that was also really important for us too is this was the inaugural NFT 100. So if you look at the list, there are a lot of OGs on the list. And that was really intentional and important because we wanted to recognize the trailblazers and the pioneers who paved the way for all of this to be possible. And that was one thing I noticed on a lot of the other lists, which I'm not gonna name any names, but they focused on what was hot right now versus who got us here, right? And so it was important to me that NFT Now have a voice in the conversation and also use that opportunity to shine a light on the OGs and also the diverse talent that exists in this space. It was a labor of love. It was received incredibly well. I was actually blown away at the reception to it because, like you said, Jess, like when you make a list, you're guaranteed to make some people unhappy. The really tough thing is straight up, there are way more than 100 people who are qualified to be on it at the same level. And so you just have to make tough choices. And that's why it was very important for us to release a detailed methodology, which you can find if you go to nftnow.com/NFT100. You'll see the list. And in the nominations link, you'll see there's a detailed methodology on what factors we weighed. And it's not a strict algorithmic number crunch. There are a lot of different forces and factors at play. At the end of the day, our editorial team got together and weighed a ton of all of these different factors. And we got input from the community, because we wanted also the community to have a say. But what we didn't want was a popularity contest or something that could be manipulated or botted or anything like that. So it wasn't a voting system. We weren't putting anyone against each other. It was a nomination process. And it was actually very important because we recognized that, even though our editorial team lives, breathes, sleeps this, right? Eats this. Like we are all in this. There's still so many people in the space. We might miss something. So it was a really nice way to ensure that the community kind of kept us in check and reminded us, hey, this is important, or, oh, I hadn't thought of this. And so I think that it was really important for us to do it right. And it was really important that it not just be about sales. Don't get me wrong. Sales volume, this NFT sales volume for product, that was definitely a factor in there. Social media footprint, sure. As I said, it wasn't an algorithmic number crunch. We focused on achievements. We focused on intangibles. We focused on history. We focused on innovation. We focused on community building and engagement. We focused on diversity and representation. We want to make sure that this list doesn't reflect like entrenched inequities and hierarchies that we can't allow to dictate the future of Web3. I don't think any list is ever perfect, but I'm really proud of the one that we put together. And it was really special. We gathered the honorees at the Rainbow Room during NFT NYC for for an invite-only dinner. 65th floor of Rockefeller Center. And the energy there was just electric. Bringing all of these creators and tastemakers and builders and leaders and champions of the space together in one room. Can't tell you how many people have said, oh, I finally met so-and-so, like who I'd been trying to meet for forever, like at your event and all that. The NFT 100 is it's more than just one list. It's more than just one night or one article or whatever. It's like we really see it as like an important foundation, very like one of our flagship temples for NFT Now, and a community that we want to continue to grow with and create value with going forward.
So I think people listening to this interview will, amongst other things, walk away with this understanding of like the depth and vision that you sort of approach everything with here. And I think that's amazing. It makes you think about like what are sort of the structures in place or how do you get to such clarity? And my guess is, and having, knowing some other members of your team, you sort of have this team at NFT Now that is really active thought partners and explorers and sort of living, breathing and diving into this. So many of the folks that listen to the Club podcast are organization builders. We're looking to build new types of organizations using these new tools. And one of those big thorny questions is co-founders, building the right early team, creating that sort of culture. It seems as if you've done a great job at that. I'm wondering if there's any insights you can share with us.
Build with your friends. Honestly, I feel so lucky. I feel so lucky because Alejandro and Sam are juggernauts, each of them. We all have very complementary skill sets. And I think most critically, we have 5 years, 7 years of friendship before we were ever co-founders. And that's rare. I recognize it's rare. The thing is, it feels so organic. It feels so natural. It fell into place so easily. The origin stories, it just all fell into place. It's I went out to visit Alejandro in Jackson Hole. He was out there during COVID. I went out in December. It was supposed to be me unplugging. I'm unplugging. I'm not all that. But Blau had just pulled me down the NFT rabbit hole. So I roll into Jackson Hole, wild-eyed. Speaking of NFTs, as Alejandro likes to say, he was foaming at the mouth, and I'm like, Ale, you got to understand this stuff. You got trust me on this, NFTs. And Ale has a background in crypto. He's done stuff in crypto before. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's built and sold media companies, and so he got it. He got it as well. And then independently, Sam got into NBA Top Shot, and it was just this whole thing where we all kind of we all had our different inroads in, and then we all started to realize that this was going to change everything forever. And we also critically just have complementary skill sets. Alejandro is so good at things that I am not. Sam is so good at things that I am not, and I'm good at things that they are not as well. And we're able to keep each other in check in that way. It's crazy because, you hear about all the time, you'll hear these co-founders don't actually like each other. They don't get along. There's beef and that's unthinkable for us. We're friends first and foremost. And it's really special. It's really special. And it's easy to take that for granted because it just feels so natural and it feels so organic. We have that trust, and we have that trust that each of us is looking out for each other. I think if you have the opportunity to build with someone that is a close friend or someone you really trust and respect, and again, someone who adds to the equation, that's an opportunity that you can't turn down. It's also something you need to weigh pretty considerably when making these decisions. I mean, NFT Now would not be what it is if it were 3 Matt Medveds or 3 Sam Eisels or 3 Alejandro Navias. It took the 3 of us and our distinct strengths and also our distinct weaknesses in conjunction and in harmony with each other to build what we've built. And I think that's again, it feels very natural, and that's how you know it's special.
Matt, I appreciate you spending time this conversation. I didn't get through a third of the topics that I think I would want to get into at some point. So there's future conversations to be had. The opportunity to speak to somebody who's just focused on this chunk that I'm just going to call it Web3 media, which is the thing that really dominated our conversation here, and have such a history in doing it, and sort of the compare and contrast and the experiences, and just being a professional in the media space for so long, and then being at the forefront of media in Web3, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to try to get some of those insights out of here, and definitely walked away with the few things that sort of helped me recontextualize a little bit, or at least maybe bring some potency to some of the the intuitions that we have that we're really excited to be building out. We have a lovely media steward on our team now, and this is a place that we're stepping into, and I think there's a lot of inspiration here. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us so freely, and for all the work that you do in the space as well. And I want to just leave you with any opportunity to point people to where they should find you and NFT Now and anything else you want to share.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jess. And we'll have to do this again because I'd really enjoyed our conversation. I always enjoy chatting with you. And yeah, look, NFT Now. Follow us at nftnow.com. Sign up for our newsletter there. We're just at NFT Now across all socials. If you want to follow me, it's at Matt Medved in Web 2. It's at Medved in the Web 3 side. It's those handles for for all Web 3 platforms. I probably got the Medved, but if it's a Web 2 social media one, it's Matt Medved. Please do follow us at NFT Now. We're only scratching the surface of where we're going to take it, and there's some really excited things that are going to be rolling out later this summer, later this year. If you're not already in our Discord, I would strongly suggest you do. That's alpha. That's alpha right there. And yeah, just say what's up and engage with us. Like I always say, Web3 rewards those who show up. And we're hiring, by the way. We are hiring. So if you go to nftnow.com, click that careers tab, we have a number of open roles, and we are looking for passionate people who want to build in Web3, passionate people who want to help build the future of Web3 media. And there's a number of different roles open and different skill sets. And if you have something, if you feel like you'd be a fit, please apply. And feel free to tweet at me or slide in the DMs, and let me know you've applied. Follow up if you don't hear back. One thing Alejandro likes to say is following up is an act of service, and I really believe in that. Always feel free to do that. And yeah, look, the bear market is a great time to build, and that's what we're doing. And so we want similarly passionate people along for the journey with us.
What a great opportunity. I just created this How to Work with Jess OS so my team can be more effective working together. And one of them is, I said, following up is kindness to me, because, is it a challenge to live in the space with 4 billion channels? And I was like, you're not bothering me. It's pure kindness. I love you so much if you bump this to the top of my list.
Oh yeah, because there's just too many channels these days. There's too many platforms. So I need people to bump things back up again sometimes just to find it. Oh, it was on Telegram. Oh, okay.
Crypto fixes
Signal.
this, though, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Crypto fixes this, right? Bitcoin fixes
Blockchain always fixes this, right?
Exactly. Well, man, appreciate your time. Really stoked to see what's next for NFT Now. And if you're looking for a gig in the media and Web3 space, go hit up Matt. People seem to have fun there, so it seems like a really good place to spend your time.
We're having fun, and I hope you're having fun too, Jess. This was fun. So thank you for having me. I look forward to seeing you again, whether it's in a tuxedo or at a Tiesto show.